Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Sander van der Burg will present his presentation on sustainable seaweed production in Europe, economic and environmental insights from the GENIALG project. My name is Anna Viskovic, and today I will moderate the session. EAStalk webinars last for 45 minutes with 30 minutes of presentation time and 15 minutes for questions and answers. After Sander presents his presentation, you can be unmuted and all the questions you have for him can be asked directly. During the presentation, you can send me a question request or a private message, and I will put you in a queue for the question and answer section. Sander van der Burg is a senior researcher of aquaculture and mariculture at Wageningen Economic Research in the Netherlands. An environmental scientist by training, his projects focus on the sustainable development of aquaculture value chains, and since 2011, Sander studies the development of seaweed value chains, including economic feasibility, life cycle impact, as well as the valuation of ecosystem services and the true pricing. He is currently involved in the Horizon 2020 projects, GENIALG, United, and the FutureEUAqua, as well as the various other national and international research projects. Before we start with the presentation, I would like to ask you to open in another tab the website slido.com. You can open it on your computer, tablet, or a phone. And after the question and answer section, we will have a time for a quick 3-question feedback from you. On each question, you will have approximately 10 seconds to answer. We would like to ask you kindly to do it because we are appreciating your feedback so we can work on improving the webinars later for you. Dear Sander, many thanks for joining us today and for accepting our invitation to host the EAStalk webinar. Feel free to start your presentation.
Yep, thanks Anna. Thanks for the introduction and the kind words, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to present the GENIALG work to the European Agriculture Society. In the next 25 minutes or so, I will indeed present some work, and you have already kindly introduced me and my background, so I can keep that short. Oh, move. So as you said, Anna, I work at Wageningen Economic Research. Wageningen Economic Research is one of the research institutes of Wageningen University and Research. We do a lot of since 2011, do quite a bit of seaweed research, often together with other research institutes, both within and outside of Wageningen. So our colleagues in plant sciences, food and bio-based research, and environmental sciences often cooperate in research projects with us. And we also participate in a number of European research projects on seaweeds and agriculture in general. It's interesting to note that in 2011, Wageningen still had its own small test farm in the Eastern Scheldt in Zeeland, where we did grow our own seaweed in a small line-based system. And since then, we have seen quite a few companies come, and some of them have already gone again, who experimented with seaweed cultivation on a commercial basis. As of now, we no longer have a test site, unfortunately, but we do cooperate with these companies when it comes to seaweed and seaweed cultivation techniques. My background is in environmental sciences, as you said, and I work for a socio-economic research institute, and this means that we often focus on cost and benefits. We look at scenarios for future seaweed cultivation, and we study environmental impacts, but we also have studied the acceptance of consumer acceptance of seaweed-based products. And as of now, we are involved in a few projects on the ecosystem services provided by seaweed cultivation and how those can be valued and capitalized. Most of the findings that I will present come from the GENIALG project, with a bit from another project. GENIALG is a Horizon 2020 project that started in 2016. This officially is our last year. It is coordinated by CNRS in France, and GENIALG is short for Genetic Diversity Exploitation for Innovative Macroalgal Biorefinery. The objective of the project is to bring together companies to develop integrated biorefinery of seaweed improve production, improve biorefinery, and look at the new products, new markets for seaweed. And those markets, well, they are explicitly sought in the alginate market, the biostimulant market, the pharmaceuticals market, cosmetics, and bioplastics. And for each of them, there's a company involved in the GENIALG project. So for alginate, it's Algaia. For biostimulants, it's Omics. For pharmaceuticals, Iota Pharma. Cosmetics is Lasonia. And bioplastics is Biomi in the UK. Wageningen does lead a work package on the economics, value chain analysis, and the patents, and most of the results that I will present today come from that work package. And a few of my findings come from another project that ended 2 years ago. It's called SOMOS, short for Technical Standards for Safe Production of Food and Feed from Marine Plants, a Safe Use of Ocean Space. Pretty long title. Have a look at our nice YouTube videos that are available to all of you on the internet. In this project, we aim to develop a safety assessment, a safety control to address the safety issues that come with seaweed cultivation, and both the safety issues in food safety, but also environmental safety and occupational safety. The project has ended and was funded by a Lloyd's Register Foundation, and a follow-up is in the making. What I will present today, well, I want to take you through these 4 steps. I want to briefly describe why seaweeds are interesting and why there is a lot of attention for seaweeds. I want to have a short look at the global seaweed sector before we dig into the European context and where I describe what's happening in Europe. And I want to discuss and introduce 4 strategies for the European seaweed sector to move forward. Now, I should warn you in advance that I assumed when I prepared this presentation that you are not all seaweed experts. So if you are a seaweed expert and you're working on this full time, I hope there's something new in there for you. But I also included some general introductory slides on seaweeds. What you see here in front of you on the picture is a commercial seaweed cultivation in the Netherlands, in the Eastern Scheldt. This was a company, Seaweed Harvest Holland. This picture was taken a few years ago with big ambitions, and very recently they were declared bankrupt. And that's a telling story when it comes to seaweed, unfortunately. People are still experimenting with seaweed cultivation, and not everything succeeds. And this company was ambitious. They had huge plans to move offshore, cultivate seaweed on a very large scale in the offshore wind farms. But in practice, the market demand was not yet big enough. And that's a sad story. There's also some personal tragedy there. But I still think that this was a nice company and a good approach, and that there is a future for seaweed cultivation. But let me elaborate on that in the next minutes and slides. Let me first briefly introduce why seaweeds are so interesting. And on this slide, I have included a few headlines from the news that were published last week or the week before, and they show that there is a continued interest in seaweed products, whether it's for pesto or tapenade-like products, whether it's for seaweed-based chemicals. There are new products are constantly developed and marketed based on seaweeds. And this is also recognized by governments, and whether it's the Norwegian government or European Commission, many governments see the potential of seaweed, and they do aim to stimulate the sector in developing further, making new products and creating new markets. So there's clearly this, if you look at the news, there's news items almost every other day. There clearly is a lot of interest in seaweed as a product. Another reason that seaweeds are so interesting is that they relate to some of the big societal challenges that we currently face. And on the left-hand side, you can see a news item on the World Economic Forum where they already link seaweed. Seaweed was one of these 5 ways to a post-COVID-19 recovery. On the left-hand side, there's mentioning of seaweed as one of the foods of the future. The regenerative ocean farming concept below emphasizes the environmental benefits, the ecosystem benefits of seaweed cultivation, and it is a plea for more nature-inclusive seaweed cultivation off the coast in the US. And on the left-hand side, bottom of the screen, a news item that links seaweed cultivation to climate change. And seaweeds are often presented as a solution to climate change because they do sequester carbon when they grow, and this could be one way to reduce carbon levels in the atmosphere. That's not the topic of this presentation. While it's undoubtedly true that seaweeds they capture carbon, it's not a direct carbon sink if you use your seaweeds for products. If you use it as fertilizer or food, the carbon gets re-emitted pretty soon. So this is nice, but not as easy as this news item suggests. Another clear example of the societal relevance and the interest in seaweed is in the recently published Farm to Fork strategy of the EU. Seaweed is not only linked to this Farm to Fork strategy, it also links to the Blue Bioeconomy strategy, the Blue Growth strategy, the Green Deal, food and resource security. But in this particular document, it is explicitly mentioned that the Commission will set out well-talked support for the algae industry because they see algae as an important source of alternative protein for a sustainable food system and global food security. Well, that clearly is a support from the Commission for further development of the seaweed sector. Also, not so long ago, this Pegasus Cost Action published its final report, recommendations for the European seaweed sector, and they came up with this figure where they described 3 strategies, 3 things that have to be developed to secure future growth of the European seaweed sector. Now, on the right-hand side, there are a couple of environmental constraints that have to be solved. There are improvements in cultivation that need to be worked on. In the middle, there are constraints in regulation. Most of them relate to food safety regulation. And on the left-hand side, there is the challenge to grow the market for seaweed-based products. As you probably expected, this is the part of on this part of the diagram I will focus. I will focus on the market and how current developments in Europe are related to market development of seaweed. Before I go into the European sector, I think it's good to briefly provide some basic information on the global seaweed sector, also to sketch the context in which these European companies now operate. And the FAO's State of World Fisheries and Aquaculture always is a nice resource for graphs and data on global production of fisheries and aquaculture. The figure that you see in front of you describes global aquaculture production since 1990, and well, of course, one thing that you immediately notice is the staggering growth of the aquaculture sector worldwide. The top orange boxes represent aquatic algae, most of them seaweeds, and you can also see, you immediately see that since 1990, the volume of global seaweed production grew every year, except for the last year, if you look closely. But there's a lot of growth there in the seaweed sector. It's also clearly visible that seaweeds have always been a substantial part of global agriculture. If you look a bit deeper into the numbers on seaweed, so some more data from this FAO report. The total seaweed harvest, 32.4 million tons, by far most of which is cultivated. So 97.1% comes from seaweed cultivation. The remaining 2.9% is from wild harvest. That's a small sector. By far most of it is cultivated, and by far most of it is cultivated in East and Southeast Asia. Some 90-95% comes from that part of the world. The total production of seaweed, well, it has more than tripled between 2010 and 2018. And again, following the FAO, the major driver for growth here is the production of red seaweeds in Indonesia. A few years ago, Indonesia adopted a new policy. They see seaweeds as an important source of income for its country, and they stimulated the seaweed production, red seaweed production, on some of the islands, and well, with success. So this is where most of the growth in recent years has come from. The FAO does not provide a lot of data on the European seaweed sector. I think they mentioned some issues of confidentiality and non-disclosure there, but it does recognize that there is a lot of interest in seaweed as a potential feedstock for the bioeconomy. So limited data, but they do recognize the increasing attention for seaweeds. That's on the production. Just one slide on the current main seaweed markets. Because it's basic and important to know, most of the seaweed worldwide is used for direct consumption, human consumption. In Europe, we are very familiar with the food thickeners, the alginates, the carrageenan, that are very widely distributed and are present in many different food products that we sell. But globally, direct consumption is still the biggest market. A very small percentage of total seaweed production goes to other markets, goes to biostimulants, fertilizers, animal feed. But there's a lot of research and interest in these applications of seaweed. So we'll definitely get back to that, as that's also what the GENIALG project focuses on. Now, I think it helps if you look at the global seaweed sector to differentiate between 4 different worlds of seaweed production. On the one hand, we have the production of large-scale brown seaweeds in Asia, which is often low-tech production systems. They are quite labor-intensive. This is produced offshore. The sector does face some challenges there. They have to move further offshore. They have a lack of personnel, so they do look for ways to mechanize or to automate seaweed harvesting, and they often produce the brown seaweeds. Now, a second world of seaweed comprises the small-scale red seaweed cultivation, even though it adds up to a large volume of seaweed, definitely. This is often done in shallow offshore sites or in ponds, amongst others in Indonesia, Africa, and India. And the picture that you see is taken in Indonesia in a mixed culture pond. So this farmer produces seaweed, produces red seaweed together with mussels and fish. The third world of seaweed consists of the harvesting of wild seaweeds. As I said before, it's only a small percentage of total seaweed harvest, but in some regions it's still it is a significant industry, if only because the seaweeds are abundant there and they can be a nuisance for tourism once they end up on the beach. In Brittany, quite some seaweed is harvested, and the same is done in Norway, Scotland, and Ireland. However, this sector has very limited growth potential. The amount of seaweed that can be harvested yearly is regulated. Like there are quota for fisheries, there are also quota for seaweed harvesting. And it's also good to mention that this is also somewhat contested. in many of these regions, the local population opposes the mechanical harvesting of seaweeds by boats, as you can see on this picture. The fourth world of seaweed, small-scale production in Europe. It also happens in US, in Australia, and that's basically what we are now looking at in the GENIALG project. Is this, as of now, small-scale production in Europe and US and Australia? Can this be a sustainable alternative to the other three worlds of seaweed? Now, the picture that you see over there is the Dutch company Seaweed. This was the first commercial seaweed cultivator in the Netherlands, and they, well, since then I think they tripled in size, and they are still active as a commercial and a successful company producing seaweeds for the food market. So my question, well, is this, can this be a sustainable alternative for the other worlds of seaweed, and of course, assuming that it will scale up in the future? Well, let me, I'm going to go through a couple of recent developments and issues, but I can already summarize the next slides now, and I think we should look at this European seaweed sector as a young and innovative sector. There's a lot of cooperation there, so these companies and research institutes, they do work together a lot, but there is a big challenge there to bridge the valley of death. So they have to move from pilots and innovation to large-scale commercial cultivation, and that's going to be challenging. And it will be possible, but we have to be careful with some of the risks that are in place. On the next slides, I will briefly go through some developments in market organization, network, science innovation, and I will discuss the strategies for further growth. And let me start with market organization. I think most of you and quite a few in the seaweed world are not aware of this initiative, but the European Normalization Institute has recently published a first technical standard on algae and algae products. This technical committee 454 of the CEN was set up to come up with algae and algae-based products, and it was assumed there that the ambiguous definitions in place and lack of tailor-made standards are a barrier to growth of the European seaweed sector. So this standard, the link is, you can find the link there somewhere. It's the first European standard for algae and algae-based products, and it sets out to describe uniform definitions for algae and algae-based products. It's only the first standard published by this committee, but in the future more will follow, and particularly on the bottom of my screen, the technical committee will also develop guidance on the application of algae and feedstock in energy and non-energy products. While these standards are technically speaking not regulation or laws, they are voluntary standards. They can be the basis for legislation. So this development, it is very important for the sector, and it's good to be aware of that and to be aware of what's happening. And I think certification, standardization like this, it's part of the maturation of a sector. It means that the companies active in a sector easier agree on terms and on definitions, and they use the same names, the same monitoring protocols, measurement techniques to determine pollution or determine quality of seaweed. So it's definitely an important development in the professionalization of European seaweed sector. Another thing that's happening and that's visible throughout the world is the rise of new networks that promote seaweed. And the example in the middle is the one that I'm most familiar with. It's the Noordzeeboerderij in the Netherlands. they have established a seaweed platform, bringing together some 70 companies and organizations from different backgrounds, working on food safety, working on economics, working on markets, but most of all sharing their knowledge and insights and networks with other members of this platform. And well, the benefit of that is that small companies have easier access to large companies, that large companies know what's happening out there, and that they together can approach governments or financiers or investors. So a lot of things are happening there. It's also worth mentioning that this Noordzeeboerderij has a kind of a spin-off, a North Sea Innovation Lab, so they have a offshore test site in the North Sea where they grow seaweeds and where they are going to experiment with seaweed cultivation in combination with mussel cultivation, and where they will also do research on the feasibility of co-location of seaweed production in offshore wind farms. And as you can see on this diagram, the offshore wind companies, they are also involved in this network. Kind of similar networks exist in other countries. So Norway has a special interest group on seaweeds, and very recently the UN Global Compact published this manifesto for a sustainable future on the seaweed revolution. So have a look at that. The link is there. It's a nice effort to bring together a lot of things happening in the world of seaweed, not only in Europe but also in the US and in Australia. Now, what I want to describe next is some insights from the GENIALG project, where we investigated trends in seaweed research. And the figure that you see in front of you describes the number of publications on the five different seaweed markets studied in the GENIALG project over time. As a reminder, the GENIALG project focused on pharmaceuticals, bioplastics, bio-stimulants, alginate, and cosmetics. Now, this is based on Scopus, so we had a look at the number of publications per year using these search terms, and well, it clearly shows an increase in the number of publications for pretty much all the different sectors, all the different markets. Most strongly and most clearly visible when it comes to the alginate or the pharmaceuticals market. So a lot of things happening there. Quite a few publications now, whereas some 15 years ago this was much less. Another conclusion that pops up from this diagram is that bioplastics and seaweed doesn't get as much attention as the other four markets do. So there's not that many publications on that topic yet. Now we also had a look at the geographic origin of these publications to see what's happening where. So this is a relative number of publications per continent, and well, I think it's nice to see, and there's some interesting things there. I think what's first of all noteworthy is that there's quite a few publications on pharmaceuticals and seaweed in Asia. This is more than the total number of publications in Europe and North America. On the other hand, Europe and North America focus more heavily on biostimulants. When it comes to alginate and cosmetics, well, that's fairly equal. And the bioplastics, well, remember that there's only very few publications on bioplastics, so this figure itself doesn't tell you that much. The emphasis on pharmaceuticals and seaweed in Asia is interesting because it is sometimes overlooked that the Asian universities and the Asian companies also look into high-value products. It's not something that's unique for Europe. it happens in other parts of the world as well. And this is even more clearly visible when you look at the number of patents that are filed for. Somewhat older, this was done in the first year of GENIALG, and we have to update it this year. But at that time, by far most of the patents related to seaweed had their origin in China. China and Korea, and European countries. Well, there's very few patents coming from European countries at that point in time. If you look at the topics covered in these patents, well, most of them are on water treatment, there's a bit on pesticides, on medical and toilet purposes, a bit on foodstuffs, and on plant growth regulatory activity, the bio-stimulants. But interesting that we often in Europe overlook the innovation that's taking place in other parts of the world. Let me move on to the economic feasibility. This is one of the topics to be studied in GENIALG, and unfortunately, it's a bit too early to present you the numbers from GENIALG now. I wish we could, but it's not ready yet. In general, there's not that much information, empirical information on the cost of seaweed production. So a few publications that are worth mentioning. There's a report by Bjerregaard and others published on behalf of the World Bank, where they looked at the cost of seaweed production in Indonesia and Mexico. Well, you can see the numbers there. So $0.27, that is, for Indonesia, $0.66 for Mexico. If you compare that to a fairly recent publication by Buck and others, who describe the cost of seaweed cultivation on the Faroe Islands, well, you immediately see that there's a huge difference there. So I think the 36.73 are their current production costs, and they assessed a couple of scenarios, and they assume that the cost of production can be reduced to 9.27 euros per kilogram. But even then, there's a huge gap between the cost of seaweed production in Asia or in Mexico and the cost in Europe. So this huge difference, I think that's the crucial question for the European seaweed sector. Is that a problem, or can this be solved one way or another? Can it be overcome? And this is why I want to introduce 4 strategies that we see in being deployed by the European seaweed sector to get a foothold and in the seaweed market. And the first strategy that people are working on, well, pretty obvious, it's to reduce the cost of seaweed cultivation. I think there's a lot of room to reduce the cost for seaweed cultivation, both more generic, and I think as time goes on, as we experiment with seaweed cultivation, we have more experience, we can increase operational efficiency, and if we scale up, there will be some economies of scale as well. So that will reduce the cost of seaweed cultivation in itself, but more targeted efforts could focus on the potential of multiple harvesting or multiple partial harvesting. This is done by Ocean and Rainforest on the Faroe Islands, so they are able to leave their seaweed lines in the water. They harvest part of seaweed, and it will continue to grow after that. And they realize 3 harvests with 1 seed line, and that's a significant saving of costs, because seed lines are expensive. They are a important cost factor for European seaweed companies. Other ways to reduce the cost for seeds are to produce them yourself as a company, and I think quite a few companies do this nowadays. They produce their own seed lines to avoid high costs for purchasing seed lines, And while that's understandable, the downside of that is that the knowledge that is currently created when it comes to breeding of seaweed species is not used. So there are specialized companies that breed seaweed species that can deliver higher yields, and that's another important way to reduce the total cost of production. What we also see is a lot of interest in automated seeding and harvesting. There are nice YouTube videos of seaweed harvesting machines. Have a look at that, and that can be another way to reduce the overall cost of seaweed cultivation. And lastly, what we do see is innovation in production systems. I think most of the companies now still use long lines. A Belgian company has developed textiles and has proven the efficiency of textiles as a substrate for seaweed cultivation in marine conditions. Still, a lot of innovation and a lot of possibilities to reduce the costs of cultivation. Another thing that's often mentioned in this context is the possibility for co-location of seaweed cultivation in offshore wind farms. And it is then argued that there is potential synergy in transport and monitoring, and the wind farm and the seaweed cultivator can share the cost of that, and that will reduce overall costs. The downside of this is, of course, that there are big risks. If something happens to a seaweed farm and it damages a offshore wind turbine, then that will come with cost as well. And while I do see potential for co-location of seaweed in offshore wind farms, I think it's not necessarily a way to reduce overall costs for production. I don't think the synergies in transport and monitoring outweigh the extra costs for risk mitigation or transport, because in the end these farms are not located close to the shore. So I don't think co-location is a direct opportunity to reduce the costs, but what it does provide the seaweed sector with is a opportunity for large-scale production. And this is important because as of now, these farms, they are located in near shore or sites or estuaries. The space is limited there. So if you want to grow to large-scale cultivation, like hundreds of square kilometers, you would need to find space for that. And the space in between these wind turbines could be a good location for that. Now, another strategy to create a niche for European seaweed cultivators is to go for high-value markets. And I think this is pretty obvious. Why would you sell your seaweeds on commodity markets for production of alginate or carrageenan if you can also sell it on higher value markets such as the food market, the bio-stimulant market, cosmetics. What's more on this picture, pet food is also an interesting application of seaweed. And there are many examples of this, and this is in effect what's currently driving the European seaweed cultivation sector. So most of the seaweed that is currently produced by European aquaculture companies is sold on these high-value markets, in particular the food markets. Now, some critical questions there. I think it's a good market for now. I do wonder how big this market is on the long term. The market for local or fresh seaweeds, it still has to be proven that this is a really big market. I think it's also important that the global companies, they can also, and the global value chains, can also produce seaweed for these markets if you do not protect your products with patents and or standards. So in the end, the question is, why do we really need European seaweeds for these markets? Is that really necessary, or can the global companies also step in. And as an example, I was in China last year visiting some seaweed companies, and they also produce their cosmetics and pharmaceutical products based on seaweed. So that's not something that will set us apart from the Chinese producers. So how do we create a niche? How do we ensure that we have a market for European producers? A first strategy. Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Can you just wrap up the presentation?
Yeah. Yes, I will. I will briefly introduce strategy 3 and 4. So the first strategy is differentiation on characteristics of products and production processes. So more sustainable seaweed, nature-based or local seaweed. This is happening as we speak. So there are standards for seaweed. Like the, I will then skip this one, but sorry, that's one. Let's go back. So I think this is an interesting strategy, but I'm not sure if it will always work. I don't think it will always work. Often seaweeds are not direct consumer products, but they are used in burgers or in other products. So then a label will not be that visible. And another drawback is that it is not limited to European producers only. So organic or MSC labeled seaweeds can also come from other parts of the world. A fourth strategy is the valuation and capitalization of non-market benefits of seaweed agriculture. So the additional benefits for the environment, for climate, for creating a circular economy. How do you value them, and how can you make sure that there's money flowing from the people who benefit to the seaweed cultivators? Well, this idea of payment for ecosystem services is something that's further explored in the GENIALG project, and I hope we have some results there end of the year. So, as concluding remarks, well, I think out of these 4 strategies, it's not one strategy or the other. I think in the future we need a mix of all 4 of them. The European seaweed sector should appreciate that there's a lot of innovation happening, and that the companies and research institutes cooperate. For the next few years, I think it's wise to avoid competition on market type value chains, so competition based on price only. It's important to invest in the joint development of production and markets, produce the right species in the right amounts, address food safety concerns, because this is something that affects the whole sector now, and protect innovations. Think of your patents. And last but not least, recognize that there are existing powerful global value chains, and these also develop new applications. And have a look at what's happening there and incorporate where possible. So my last slide is a very speculative roadmap into the future. I think what we will see when it comes to seaweed cultivation, this is my prediction for now. In the next years, we will see continued growth of the food market. Production will be located in sheltered areas, and the valuation of ecosystem services will become more important. The next 10 years, so the development of high-value products and a slow but surely upscaling of production and moving offshore, and the large-scale production and large-scale extraction of ingredients such as proteins and sugars. I think that we will see that eventually, but it will, in my prediction, only happen well, after 2030. So that's speculative, I know, but my guess on what's happening in the seaweed sector in the next years. So that's it. Thank you for your attention, and let's see. Well, happy to answer questions if there are.
Hi, thank you, Sander. Of course, we have plenty of questions for you. Thank you very much for explaining us more about the seaweed production in Europe. I will start with the first question from Abderrahim. how the seaweed are promoted in integrate with the multi-trophic aquaculture for both environmental and economic issues.
Yeah. So I kind of skipped that term in my presentation. Seaweed can play a role in a integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. I think it's part of the fourth strategy there, where you use seaweed to mitigate some of the environmental impacts of aquaculture, but also where you can use seaweed as a potential source of feed for the finfish. So I think this is it's a very promising concept, but as of now, it's not something that's done on a large scale commercially. Most of all, it's a research-driven concept.
Okay, thank you. Another question we have from Amina. I will try to mute Amina.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Amina.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I will ask a question just about countries that have a narrow coastal shelf and low ranges of tides. What about their opportunities in seaweed aquacultures? I just have to process that I'm from Algeria, and we are in the same case.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. I must admit I'm not too familiar with the situation in Algeria, but from what I understand, there's potential for seaweed cultivation in a lot of different regions because there are thousands of different seaweed species. If waters are deeper, then this is more demand. This requires more from your technology and your systems. So it's probably not a coincidence that most of the seaweed cultivation now is done in rather shallow waters. It will be more expensive in deep waters. Yeah. But I guess my first recommendation would be have a look at the seaweed species that are present as of now, and look at the temperature ranges and nutrient availability. The technologies, it should be possible to cultivate them.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Sander. Amina, do you have any sub-questions for Sander?
Perhaps the offshore zones could be an opportunity to this lack of serious opportunities to countries who that have less chances to develop coastal aquaculture.
Yeah, no, fully agree. And I think there's research into the feasibility of offshore cultivation and moving it further offshore. And I do see potential for that, but not in the next few years. So I think it's something that we will see on the long term.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Sander. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amina. The next question we have is from Alexandra. What do you see as the major barriers moving from pilot scale to commercial size algal-culture?
Yeah, the main barriers. Yeah, that's a good question. So I think this Dutch company that went bankrupt in the official statements, it said that there was a lack of demand for seaweed, and that's kind of remarkable because there is a lot of interest in seaweed-based products. I think the main barrier is not so much demand, but the main risk is that demand and supply are no longer in sync. If you spend too much energy on producing seaweeds without thinking of your products and your markets, that's not a viable strategy. It's not a coincidence either that most of the seaweed cultivators also have their own brands and have their own products, because you do have to create your own market as of now.
Thank you, Sander. The next question we have is from Hajar. In Morocco, considerably stocks of natural algae are widely available and distributed in the Atlantic and are the subject of collection from multiple users. Unlike the Mediterranean facade, based on your experience, it may be possible to cultivate algae in an environment of Mediterranean conditions.
Yes, yeah, I think that's it should be possible. Yeah. So, yeah, the presence of algae of natural algae there is usually a good indicator that cultivation is also feasible. Yeah.
Okay,
and the benefit. Sorry. To add to that, the benefit of cultivation is that you have greater control over the quality and the species that you are producing.
Thank you very much. The next question we have is, just a second, is from Thierry Choppen. Thierry, can you hear us?
Yes, good morning, because I am on the east coast of Canada, so it's still the morning.
That's in the morning, yeah.
A few comments. When you say IMTA on small scales and all these things, I think you are referring too much to your European experience. As a matter of fact, IMTA is done at very, very large scales in China. So it is already at very large scale.
Yep.
And also to the previous question, Morocco, Mediterranean side, but also don't forget also your Atlantic coast. There's a lot of potential there. Now, I would like to go back to reducing the cost of seaweed cultivation. You presented it very much as purely a technological issue, which is a very Westerner approach to things with a technological issue. But I would say that the biggest part of the portfolio to reduce the cost of seaweed cultivation, as a matter of fact, is the difference in cost of labor force in different parts of the world. Where Westerners have a very hard time to reduce the cost of seaweed production is we cannot compete with the labor cost of Asian countries. So I think that that's very important things to have in mind beyond technological advance. If we want to reduce the cost, we will have to reduce or find different way of being competitive with the labor force cost.
Yeah, you're completely right. So I answered that question, and from a European perspective on IMTA, you're right that it's done in China and it's done in Indonesia. So it's even more remarkable that there's so much research on IMTA in Europe, but no commercial IMTA. Well, clearly it is possible to produce different species in one system. But so you're right, yeah. And likewise on the cost of seaweed production, the European producers or the American, for that matter, they won't be able to compete on.
We are not Americans.
No, okay, no. I was not referring to your farm, but but of course the cost of the labor costs are very high compared to Asian producers. So this is what drives the investigations into mechanization and automated harvesting, automated seeding. But it is a technology-driven approach. True.
On the last thing, if I may comment, in innovation, you seem to measure innovation by the number of patents on all these things. Is that the only way to evaluate or measure innovation? Because as a matter of fact, a lot of innovation is about know-how, which means as a matter of fact, you don't have a patent, because after a few years, the patent, you have to release what you have said or what you know. And a lot of the know-how is experience acquired over the years, never published, but it's very important.
Yeah, sure. I cannot disagree with that. It's, but I think it's nevertheless it's remarkable to see the differences in the number of patents that are filed for in different regions, in different parts of the world, even though it's only one indicator of innovation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but you're right. Yeah, there's more. Yeah.
Thank you, Thierry. Another question we have is from Jenna. Jenna is asking which companies are involved in producing the seaweed lines.
Producing the seaweed lines. Well, in the project we don't have a seaweed lines producing. The companies do this themselves. But if you're interested, I can recommend a Dutch company. It's called Hortimare, and they produce seaweed lines. I know that a French company that is part in GENIALG seaweed, they produce their own lines. And I think the same goes for Seaweed Energy Solutions, another company participating in GENIALG.
Okay, thank you, Sander. The next question we have is from Henry. To what extent can the value of ecosystem services contribute to the business case of seaweed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure either. I think there's a couple of problems there. So there's quite a few methodologies to value these ecosystem services, but valuation is not the same as actually making some money out of it. So then you can attach a hypothetical value to an ecosystem service, but you do need a mechanism to get the cash flow going, and it's not there yet. I think apart maybe from emission trading, where you can imagine that if seaweed is a recognized carbon sink, it could be part of your emission trading system. But I cannot answer this question right away. I think we need more mechanisms to capitalize on these ecosystem services and not only value them in a more hypothetical way.
Okay, thank you, Sander. I will ask now the last question before we wrap up the webinar. It's from Peter. It's actually from Moham. Thanks, Sander, for your presentation. Can seaweed production compete with fish or shrimp production in the area that two options are available?
No, I don't think that's a big risk. No, I think they are really different kind of agriculture. So I don't think that seaweed cultivation will compete with fish. On the contrary, I think if you can combine it in systems like MTA, as were mentioned before, they might even benefit each other. So I don't think there's a big risk of competition there.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to thank you all for participating in our webinar. Thank you very much, Sander, for answering to all of these questions. I would like to ask you if you can show the last slide. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
To all the participants, can you please go to the website slido.com and type the code 2605. We have 3 questions for you, and if you can answer on them, we will appreciate a feedback so we can improve our webinars in the future. We will have on each question 10 seconds for answer, but I'll be waiting for you to sign in for a while. Thank you very much, Sander. It was really interesting presentation.
Thanks.